This is Radio TV Phono Nut here, and we have today a Crosley Cruiser Deluxe. Deluxe what? Deluxe junk heap. Still has the instruction manual with it. Still had the guard over the needle, but the 12-volt wall wart was missing. That's okay. That's what we have a power supply for. Get out of my way. Now, I will tell you this one's probably going to end up getting EOL'ed in some way or another. I've got to think of some creative way to do that if it comes down to that, but I thought we'd have a little fun with it first. This is the newer model. It has 3-speed operation, 33, 45, 78, and can be used as a Bluetooth receiver, and we have variable pitch control. The usual standard ceramic cartridge with the red-bodied stylus on it. Cheap turntable mechanism, which is to be expected. Now, actually, this basic turntable mechanism was developed in the early 1980s and was used in a lot of cheap all-in-one stereos from the 80s and early 90s, but from what I remember of those, even as cheap as they were, the mechanisms seemed to be built better than these are. The Chinese just figured out a way to cheapen down an already cheap mechanism. Now, as far as these things ruining records, it goes without saying that something like this is going to cause more damage to a record over time than, say, a good component turntable with a magnetic cartridge, but if you get one of these and you see it turning the grooves of your records a different color as the record's playing, then obviously there's a problem, and 9 times out of 10 when they do that, it's either because the tracking pressure is too high or we have an inferior styli. I mean, let's just face it, the quality control on these is not top-notch by any sense of the word. Alright, we'll power it up. I'll show you what the problem is. And it would help if I turn my power supply on. Alright, we have sound out of this speaker, but the right channel is completely dead. Now, these things don't get very loud at all, and to my ears, they're very offensive to listen to. And that's wide open. And I've heard some kiddie one-tube wonder record players that had more powerful amplifiers in them. Now, the reason they sound bad is, number one, the tiny little speakers they use, and number two, the poorly designed amplifier. In fact, I believe what they're doing is running this cartridge through a low impedance line level input, where a ceramic cartridge wants to see a high level impedance around 1 megohms. If you run a ceramic cartridge through a line level input, which is typically 47K input impedance, you're going to have weak, tinny audio with no bass, and that's precisely what these Crosleys have. Another thing I don't like about these is even though they have 3 speeds, you don't have a flip stylus for LP and 78, although it's possible to change the cartridge out to one that has such a stylus, but this is really one of those record players, you know, why bother? So Crosley should have included a cartridge with a flip needle, in my opinion, but there again, they're building these things as cheaply as possible, so you can buy one for $39.95 and them still make a killing off of them. Yeah, they could build a record player that's just as good, if not better, than the vintage ones, but they're not going to do that because the price would be higher than your average China Mart shopper is willing to pay. The one thing I wanted to do to one of these, and I don't know that I could do it to this model because of the shallow case, is I wanted just to rip out the motor board and everything, cut a new motor board, and install the amplifier and drive mechanism from an older record player from the tube era that, say, maybe had a trashed case. Because let's face it, the cases on these Crosleys are probably the best part of them. But like I said, this case I don't think is deep enough to accommodate a tube amplifier. I would have to get one of the Crosleys that's got a deeper cabinet to do that. Alright, let's try it with a 78. Okay, here's a Microgroove 78 from about 1960. It's one of those discount budget label jobs with 3 songs per side. By this still having the needle guard on it and looking like it hasn't really been used that much, if at all, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if this was a warranty return somewhere that made its way through the system and then I wound up with it. And as you know, a dead channel can be anything from the cartridge all the way through the amplifier or a bad speaker. Now, in a lot of cases, in the older record players, that's really not a big deal because the amplifiers are meant to be worked on. Most of what I've seen in these are surface-mounted amplifiers, and they're not easy to work on. You can forget about getting a schematic for one. But we'll open it up and see if we can find something obvious wrong for the dead channel. If we can't, we can still EOL this thing. It plays on one channel anyway. Alright, here we are with the motor board lifted. As you can see, there's not much to these. That's our jack panel on the back, 2 little puny speakers, and our little small amplifier module and Bluetooth receiver on the same circuit board. I was hoping to get lucky and find a desoldered wire on the speaker here, but no such luck. This thing just smells Chinesey. I wonder what it'd smell like when we set fire to it. Alright, here's a better look at our circuit board. As you can see, lots of surface-mounted stuff. I think our audio amplifier is this guy over here with a heat sink attached to it. So, okay, I believe our trouble is with the cartridge connectors, because I reached under there and fiddled with them with my finger, and now we have audio out of the right channel. Okay, it just cut out again. My heart, it cracks. It's just not right. Oh, it's the worst. Okay, it just came back. Alright, we either got a wiring issue or a problem with this cartridge, one of the two. Okay, the cartridge leads just crimped to these cartridge pin connectors, and I added a little solder to the terminals here to give us a little bit better connection, so hopefully that'll take care of the dead channel. Now, this cartridge is just a cheap Chinese knockoff of a Chuo Denshi cartridge, like what was used on a lot of all-in-one systems starting in the mid to late 80s. You can get these Chinese cartridges off of eBay for a couple of dollars, shipping included. And I'll admit that I have ordered some of them and used them in cheap record players that I didn't want to invest a lot of money in. And you can also get the mounting clips to enable these to mount to a standard 1/2-inch mount tone arm for not much money. And these cartridges, as cheap as they are, when paired with a properly designed amplifier, they're not that bad, but the amplifier in these Crosleys are not properly designed. Now, they indeed make a 3mm 78 RPM stylus for this cartridge, even though it's not mentioned in the owner's manual. I think the number is fan steel number 793-S3, whereas the LP stylus is 793-S7 for sapphire, or D7 for diamond, and the ones with a metal cantilever have an M suffix, as in 793-D7M, and really the metal one is the best one, but you know, for a cheap piece of crap record player like this, you're not going to tell much difference between a metal or a plastic one. Another complaint I've read that a lot of people have about these players is they skip, especially on newer records. Well, the reason being a lot of newer records are mastered in such a way that they're bass intensive, and these cheap tone arms and cheap cartridges simply do not have the compliance to track such records. I've even read some reviews online where even the manufacturer suggested to tape quarters to the head of the tone arm, and people actually said they tried that and it stopped the skipping. Yeah, it might have stopped the skipping, but it's chewing your records up worse than they're already being chewed up. But when you have a cartridge like this, it's not compliant enough to track the grooves. It's simply, the needle is simply just going to get bounced out of the groove whenever it hits a low frequency note that the needle is incapable of tracking. And that's just the way it is. Those types of records are meant to be played on higher end turntables with a nice tone arm and nice magnetic cartridge. You know, it kills me when I go in a record store or anywhere else that sells records, and you'll see these $30 and $40 and $50 records, and next to them there'll be a stack of these things here that cost not much more than what the records cost. Now, I'm not going to pay $40 or $50 for an album, but if I ever do, I can promise you it won't be played on something like this. Something like this, at best, is only good for beat-up junk records like what you might buy at the thrift store. But this is not a good one for serious listening. These cartridges are held in by this little plastic clip here on the front, and to remove it, you very gently pull this plastic clip forward, and I mean very gently, because they will break off if you're not careful, and if they do, then you're up a creek. And then whenever you're done replacing the cartridge or whatever, you just simply snap it back in place. There's a little tit on the back of the cartridge that you just affix to the rear mount, and then move the cartridge up and snap it back in place. And another complaint with these is when you place an LP on the turntable, it scrapes the lid here. So what was Crosley's answer to that? Just provide a mat that's not even the same diameter as the platter to raise the height of the record up so it won't scrape on the lid. You've got to love these ingenious audiophile designs here that they come up with. Alright, did I detect a little wow and flutter here? Something else these things are noted for. Oh, that could be a nice intro for the EOL video. But yeah, it's working about as good as it's capable of working, and you can tell they don't ground these things very well. They're not shielded, because when I touch the metal tone arm, you hear the hum in the speakers. I even read some reviews on these in the Victrola version where these things actually caught on fire. Now one might think that something that runs from 5 or 12 volts from a wall wart wouldn't catch on fire, but you know, all it takes is enough current and enough of a short circuit and things are going to get hot, and there you go. My theory on probably what happened is the cheap switching wall wart that these come with probably malfunctioned and sent hundreds of volts through the thing, and of course then you know something's going to go into meltdown, which, you know, hundreds of volts, that's something we could use for an EOL for one of these. And like I said before, you can there is a cartridge you can buy with a flip needle that will install in this tone arm if you want to play 78s, but frankly, you know, why even bother with it, because the fidelity of these sucks. It's worse than just about any kid's record player. And I ran into some of these that didn't even have enough torque to properly play a 78, because 78s are heavier. That's especially true when the motors get a little age on them and the belts get a little age on them and start dying on you. So, you know, if you want something to play 78s, just go pick you up an old Caliphone or Audiotronics or Newcomb school record player and you'll be much better off. Oops, the intermittent problems in the volume control. Now, the thing about intermittent problems, they can be stubborn to track down, as in I was playing with the cartridge connectors and the audio popped back in and I thought that's where the problem was, but apparently it has to do with this volume control. Now the pod itself could be bad, it could be dirty, or we could have bad solder connections here. Now just looking at this, it doesn't look too bad, but that can be deceiving. However, one thing I see is when I feel this, I can feel the terminals of the volume control protruding up through on 5 out of the 6 connectors, but not here. So I'm going to unsolder this and inspect this and make sure we're making good contact, and then resolder it and spray the pot with some cleaner and see if that does it. If that doesn't do it, then that probably means the pot itself is bad, and there's nothing really we can do about that short of changing the pot out, and this is not something I'm going to spend any money on. Okay, that terminal pin was just laying over, and by the way, I don't care for this new lead-free solder. It's a bit of a pain in the butt to deal with. However, we added some good old Keister 6040 to it, so that's no longer lead-free anymore. Alright, whether it's fixed or not is anybody's guess, but it's not cutting out when I wiggle the volume knob now. Davy Crockett, choice of the whole frontier. Cleaning off the Congress and served a spell, fixing up the government and laws as well. Took over Washington, so we hear tell, and patched up the crack in the Liberty Bell. So, there you go. We looked at each Oh, and for those who don't know, the only thing this Crosley and the original Powell Crosley Corporation have in common is the Crosley name. This company is in no way, shape, form, or fashion related to the original Crosley company. This is just another case of an importer just buying the rights to use the name to slap on cheap Chinese-made garbage for brand recognition purposes. The same thing happens with a lot of other old brand names. In fact, I was in Walmart a while back and saw some RCA branded chest-height freezers. Now, the original RCA company went out of business in 1986 when GE bought them out, and the company's been passed around a few times since then. Now it's just a name slapped on cheap garbage. That's what it amounts to. Just like all these so-called retro record players and all-in-one stereo systems that carry various brand names, many of them legendary brand names that are nothing more than a slap in the face to the original company. Now we'll think of some creative ways to EOL this thing. If you can think of something and add it in the comments. I was thinking maybe some fire and a worn out copy of Downtown by Mears Miller, and I don't know, maybe a toy motorhome. Maybe should I go that far or not? But anyway, you have something creative that, leave me a comment and I'll give it some consideration. But yeah, the only way you're going to hope to get anything remotely decent out of this is to plug the line output jacks into the line input jacks of another amplifier, but even then, I wouldn't expect to get earth-shattering results. I've never even tried that. May give it a shot sometime, just to see. Might even put a little ad on to this video just to see how that does. Okay, we're plugged into a cheap Juliet component system. And it does sound better connected to an external system, but that's really about the only way you can listen to one of these and it not just totally drive you up the wall. Now here we are with a BSR mini changer connected into the phono input. And I will tell you, we have better sound quality with the BSR connected than we do the Crosley. We definitely have more bass. So yeah, really the only use I could see for this Crosley is if you had some lo-fi 78s that didn't have that wide of a frequency response anyway. And assuming you had the proper 78 needle, you could plug the Crosley into a computer or a tape deck or whatever and dub your old 78s off, but that's about the only use I could see for it. Alright, I just replaced the needle in the BSR. Here's a 78. And them all for you. And now I guess what is to be will be. Now, even as cheap as this system was back in 1974, finding one of these at an estate sale or wherever would still be a better alternative to the thing sitting under the BSR there. Now, I understand teenagers tend to go for these bottom ones here because they're so artsy and cutesy looking, but me personally, I don't care about artsy and cutesy looking. I care about performance, and even this basic low-end cheap setup here will outperform this thing here. I remember one time somebody I know asked me if I had a portable record player, that his daughter wanted one and he was going to buy her one for Christmas. So I offered to sell him a classroom school record player for $25, actually for less money than what I had in it. Well, I sent him a picture of it, and he showed it to her, and she turned her nose up at it because it wasn't modern enough looking. She wanted something like what was on the bottom. And he asked me if I had anything more modern, and I told him no. I said maybe you ought to go to the local used record store and get her a new Crosley if that's what she wants. And I was thinking to myself, my, how times have changed. Whenever I was a teenager, I wouldn't have dared turn my nose up at something that my father was willing to buy for me because I knew if I did, then that would be the end of it. He'd let me know right away quick, well, if this is what you want, then you can save up on your own and buy it. And as far as dubbing your records, even this thing has a tape output jack on it, so you can connect this to a computer or whatever, and even though this wouldn't be ideal, you'd still get a better dub than what you would get doing it with this Crosley on the bottom. Our 18 Super Hits LP, you might remember we had a cracked, broken copy, scratched up, beat up, trashed copy of this a while back. Well, I found a cheap copy online, but unfortunately it didn't come with the correct cover, which is what I really wanted to see. I'm really just curious to know what the cover for this looked like. It's just some knockoff artist recording popular hits, mainly from the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, with a few older ones thrown in.
If they know that you're about, or they could, baby, go. Bring them all to steam. Love is for us to keep. When the wind goes high, you got women on your mind. Have a dream, have a try, go out and see what you can find. You say, what can make me feel this way, my girl?
Turning out all wrong, Mom. Look what they've done to my son. If a man ever needs to die, he's dead. No one has the right to say what he said about you. Gets tied up to the ground. He gives the world its saddest sound. in and danced all night under electric candlelight. She picked me up and sat me on her knee and said, little boy, won't you? So they sprinkled moon dust in your hair and golden starlight in your eyes of blue.
Oh yeah, and one other thing I noticed before we end this video, not only is the rubber platter mat not sitting straight on the turntable platter, the platter itself is sort of crooked here. Just some more of that lovely China Incorporated quality control, or lack thereof. I think about every one of these that rolls off of the assembly line has a problem that the other one didn't have. You might get 1 in 100 that's actually okay, but as far as most of these go, well, really, as far as I'm concerned, as far as all of them go, they could have a big dumpster at the end of the assembly line that these things fall off into, and that's where they need to be. And I did try off of the camera running this through the tape input on this, and we had a slight bit more volume, but our tonal quality wasn't any better. Also, I tried manually turning the record by hand with the power turned off on this, and no signal passes to this, so that tells me they're not taking the line output jack directly off of the cartridge, because if they were, I'd get something at even with the record player unplugged and turning it by hand. There's no schematic to this, and the circuit board's so small, there's no way I'd try to trace it out manually, but I suspect what's taking place, they have a preamp chip that takes care of your signal from your phonograph cartridge as well as your auxiliary input on the back and your Bluetooth and all that good stuff. And then they take the output of that preamp chip and run it to the line output jacks here on the back. And then from there, they connect to the volume control, because I do know the line output jacks are not affected by the volume control. And then the output of the volume control will go into that final amplifier IC, the one that we saw on the heat sink. That's my best guess for how this thing is wired up. And yeah, I could go in here and whip all that out and put a new amplifier in and all that, and new speakers, and make it sound better, but you know, you still got this crappy mechanism. Like I said before, if I wanted to get industrious, the best thing I could do with one of these is just rip the whole thing out, cut a new motor board, and put an older AC operated phono drive and an amplifier, a decent amplifier in here, and then you might have a decent portable record player on your hands. But alright, enough rambling on about the Crosley. We'll probably be doing an EOL on this one day, so stay tuned for that.